I appreciate you guys coming out. My name is Dr. Alex DiFrancesco, and we're going to go ahead and get into our free ADHD workshop. So first and foremost, I really want to thank you guys for coming out here tonight. I know how busy life can get. We're doing this, we're doing that, we're going all over the place, right? So I definitely get that, and I appreciate that. So I promise to be very efficient. I promise to give you a lot of value, and I also promise to give you stuff that you can do starting tomorrow that will start to help and start to make a difference either in your life or in your child's life. Okay, so just a little bit of background on us. So my wife and I started this practice in 2022. So we thought we didn't spend enough time together, so we thought let's start a practice together, right? It's truly been an experience. It's been one of the best things, honestly, I've done to this point in my life, is being able to do the thing I love most in the world with the person I love most in the world. So it's been really cool to build this from the ground up with my wife, Dr. Bree. So some things that we're going to go ahead and get into tonight. Like I said, I'm going to be efficient with this. I want to give you guys plenty of value and answer some questions maybe that you didn't have answered previously. So some things that we're going to go over tonight is what actually is ADHD. Because to me, it feels a little bit like it's a term that's getting thrown around a little too liberally, in my opinion, right? It just kind of gets thrown this way and that way. So like, what actually constitutes it? What are some of the pillars that make it up? What's its definition, right? What's unique about it scientifically, right? Why is it something that seems to happen enough where it can actually warrant a scientific diagnosis, right? Like I had mentioned, what are some things that you're going to be able to do starting tomorrow for free, right? That will start to make a difference, like I said, either in your life or in your child's life. And then also, how can neurologically focused chiropractic care, which is what we do here in our office, how can that help, like I said, with ADHD, but all sorts of other things? It's part of the reason why we have that great big wall up there. I can tell you that nobody up on that wall and all of the other people that we have seen, we have not seen exact copies yet, right? So it's always something different, and we've been able to get really cool results for people across the board. So before we really dive into the content, I just want to give you guys a quick backstory on who I am and why it is that this is the patient population that I chose to work with, right? So something funny happens when you go to chiropractic school. Immediately people are going to start asking you, who is your who and who or what is your why, right? So who is it that you want to help? What is the patient population that you're most interested in helping as a chiropractor? Or who did you become a chiropractor for, right? I really didn't have an answer to that question or a why, right? It's like, why did you want to become a chiropractor? Why did you want to help these particular people? Why did you want to help your who? And when you get to school, there's a ton of people that you'll meet, and they have these amazing stories, and that they're like a fifth generation chiropractor. And you know, I had gotten adjusted when I was in 10th grade. I just thought it was kind of cool, and nothing ever really tickled my fancy more. So I kind of ended up there. And so I really didn't have an answer to either of those questions really throughout the entirety of school. It wasn't until, honestly, we opened up our own practice where it hit me like a ton of bricks as to who my who is and who my why is. So as you can see here, this is my family. It's a pretty old picture. I'm the oldest of 5, so I've got my younger brother right here. I've got 3 younger sisters, and then I've obviously got my parents, my mom and my dad right there. So like I said, I'm the oldest, and then obviously my brother. And if you knew my mother, you would know that she desperately wanted a girl. She really, really wanted a daughter, right? And so she went up to my dad and she's like, one more time? And my dad's like, sure, 50-50, it's another boy, and my life is set, right? The one thing he didn't take into consideration is that my mother is the ultimate bargain shopper. So she got the 3-for-1 special going on daughters. Totally natural, no therapies, no nothing. She was pregnant with triplets, and she got her wish. She got 3 daughters instead of 1, right? So before they knew it, both of them were 33 at the time. They had 5 kids under the age of 5, which was a little bit more than what they had originally bargained for. So they had to have a real conversation, like, you know, what are we going to do about this? And we were really fortunate and really blessed that my dad was actually able to support our entire family on just his income. And my mom was able to be a stay-at-home mom with us, right? So I'm very thankful for my dad. I'm continuing to be thankful for all the things that he does for us. But he's actually not the specific who that I'm talking about. I'm actually going to talk about my mom because my dad was working so hard. There were plenty of doctor's appointments. There were plenty of lunches that were forgotten at home that had to get run back up to the school. There was plenty of poster board that needed to be bought 24 hours before a project was due, right? Like all of that fell on her. Yeah, come on in, guys. You guys can get something to eat and then have a seat where you haven't missed just about anything yet. Yeah, go for it. If you guys are hungry, if you're just ready to sit. So where was I? Oh, I was talking about my mom. So like I was saying, she basically gave it all up for the 5 of us, right? She was college educated. She had a degree. She had a job. She had a job while she was pregnant with me and my brother. But she chose to give all of that up so that the 5 of us could live the life that we really wanted to, right? And so that's really who I do this work for, is moms who are willing to do absolutely anything for their kids, and won't take no for an answer, basically. So this is obviously a pretty old picture, so I'll show you. I think she did a pretty good job. So that's a pretty updated picture. She's got a couple doctors up there, radiology tech, teacher, professional recruiter, right? So that's my who, is moms who are willing to do absolutely anything for their kids. And funny enough, you don't really have to look too hard for that. It comes pretty hardwired, I think. Now my why is a little bit different. So I was really blessed to not only have a fantastic mother, but I also had a phenomenal godmother. She was my dad's sister, my Aunt Deb. She was there when I was born. I mean, just from the moment she held me, there was a connection. We did everything together. She took me to my first movie, which was a really big deal. I think it was Mulan, right? Show you, kind of date myself. It was a good movie, man. It was one of my favorites, right? So she took me there. Sometimes she would just pick me up and we would just go for a drive, right? We wouldn't go anywhere. Sometimes we would go get dinner, right? And she'd make me pay at like 4 years old. Obviously, it was her card or her cash, but I had to tell the waiter, like, here's the card, and I had to figure out the tip. I had to figure out the change. She loved teaching life skills, which is what she did for 30 plus years as a teacher, a principal, and an administrator in an inner city school in Youngstown, Ohio. So she did that for well over 30 years. We remained close through high school. When I went off to college and then off to grad school, I'd call her every other weekend, like every Sunday we would catch up. And as I started to get a little bit older, she felt comfortable to kind of, clue me in on how was work that day, right? And to be honest with you, she would tell me some of these stories, and the one time I told her, I'm going to go, Aunt Deb, I don't really know why you keep going back. I mean, I'm sure these kids are sweet. I go, but they also kind of sound a little crazy, and the parents sound kind of crazy. Like, I don't know why you keep putting yourself through this. And she said something to me that really struck me. Like, it really to this day has stuck with me. And her answer was, Alex, if I don't help these kids, I genuinely don't know who will. And so then, okay, I got it. Like, okay, I can understand that. So I continued on through grad school, and there was nobody more proud that I was going to become a doctor than my Aunt Deb. She would tell anybody who would listen, right? And so about 7 weeks before I was set to graduate, I got a phone call that she had passed away unexpectedly. And that really hit me hard. She never really got to actually see me graduate, And so it was at the end of the year. I graduated at the end of 21. And so we were already going into the holidays, so it was already kind of a little bit of a blur for me. So I just kind of woke up one day and, oh my gosh, it's 2022. We're signing a lease to a space, and we're opening this place up, right? And I always thought I would work with athletes, like with high school kids, or maybe work with the Cowboys or the Mavericks. And it turns out those jobs are kind of hard to come by. They're just not handing them out, right? But I still hadn't quite figured out who my why was. And one day I got a phone call, and it was this mom who was calling, and she said she had seen us on Facebook and said, I don't know what else to do with my kid. He's 9 years old. He's got awful Tourette's syndrome, and he has this tic disorder where he's constantly having to clear his throat. His anxiety is through the roof, right? And now I'm like 6 months removed from school, right? This was one of my very first patients, and she's like, do you think you can help? And I said, of course, absolutely. Come on, let's get him set up with an initial exam. And then I hung up the phone, and I'm like, oh shit, I don't know if I can. I've never worked with that before, right? Like, in theory, I know what to do, but I've never actually done it. So she brought him in, and as I was having the conversation with her, as we were doing the initial, right, I could tell that she was definitely desperate. But I could also tell that if I didn't help, she didn't care. She was going to find somebody who would, right? She would just go on to the next person. So I really kind of connected with that, right? A mom who was willing to do anything for her kid. So I found my who. And then as we started to get her son under care, not only did the tics go away, not only did the Tourette syndrome stop, not only did his anxiety go down, the only thing we really can't get him to stop doing is talking about or playing basketball. Loves hoops, right? Like that's his ultimate favorite thing. And that really kind of lit me on fire, right? Like I really connected as I started to see him progress through care. I'm like, boy, that really stuck with me. Like I got a lot out of that. And so a couple of months ago, I was at a networking event and somebody asked, what do you do? I said, I'm a pediatric and family chiropractor. And I work with a lot of kids with neurodiverse issues, right? And he goes, wow, that's cool. I didn't know chiropractic could help with that. Why do you want to do that? And without hesitation, I told him, if I don't help these kids or help these adults, I don't know who will. And I'm like, wow, okay, I get it now, right? So I'm pretty confident tonight that as we actually get into the content, which I promise is coming, I'm pretty confident that I could impress you guys with how smart I am or how qualified I am or that I know what I'm doing. In my opinion, a lot of people can do that, right? A lot of people have these qualifications, but you don't necessarily know how much people care. So for me, it's really an opportunity to carry on my aunt's legacy, and I found my why, and this is it. So without further ado, let's get into it. So what is ADHD? Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, right? Now, I promise I won't just read definitions at you guys. I realize this is an ADHD seminar, so that probably wouldn't go over too well, right? But it's a neurodevelopmental disorder that is manifested by inattention, impulsivity, hyperactivity that can interfere with daily functioning. So these are what you can consider as the three pillars to ADHD, right? Now, hyperactivity and impulsivity, I think people could probably guess, right? That's what probably comes to mind more when you think of ADHD, right? But the one that really caught my attention actually was the inattention, right? Difficulty staying focused, being disorganized, forgetful, procrastinating, changing topics mid-conversation, difficulty keeping track of schedules, appointments, belongings, frequently losing and misplacing items, needing help with time management. This is one that can get overlooked or masked, or people don't necessarily even realize that it could be part of ADHD. And so we'll get into this a little bit further. I'm jumping ahead just a little bit, but most often I see if I see somebody with ADHD, usually it's a boy and they're younger, right? It's a lot easier to peg an 8-year-old boy with hyperactivity, right? The restlessness or the impulsivity interrupting others, right? It's a lot easier to peg an 8-year-old boy with that, right? Plus, boys are a little bit take a little bit longer to mature. I know I'm going on 29. I still need to do it. Just ask my wife, right? So it's a little bit slow with that, right? But the inattention I thought was very interesting. So when I do get girls brought in with ADHD, usually the buck has been passed a couple more years. Usually I see them at like 15, 16, 17, sometimes older, like 25, 30, what have you, right? Because a lot of this can just get chalked up to, oh, it's just her being her. Oh, she's just forgetful, or she's a little disorganized. And it didn't really sit right with me when I started to kind of piece this together, because thinking about potentially having a daughter down the line, it would break my heart thinking that I just kind of chalked it up to anxiety and that was just how it is, right? Not knowing that there was something that I could do for my daughter, right? Now, like I was saying, hyperactivity and impulsivity, those are a little bit easier to kind of spot, right? The hyperactivity, always fidgeting, not able to sit still, just kind of looking around the world, right? That's more of that hyperactivity. And then the impulsivity is interrupting others, quick decision making without really thinking about the consequences, and then engaging in certain risky behaviors, which is just a fancy way of saying addiction, right? And that can look all sorts of different ways, whether it's social media, whether it is recreational drugs, all sorts of different things. Video games, things like that, right? So these are the three pillars that ADHD is essentially built on, right? So the question that I would ask is it really that big of a deal, right? Because all I heard was, oh, sometimes girls are a little forgetful, or sometimes boys will be boys, they can't sit still, I'm sure they'll just grow out of it, or impulsivity. Kids these days, they're always on their phones, man. Ugh, they're just always on their phones, right? True. But to me, it's important because of some of these stats that I'll show you. So 7 million US children, so 11.4% of the population between ages 3 to 17 are diagnosed with ADHD just in 2023 alone, right? So in a classroom of 30 kids, that's at least 3 of them, probably more, right? So that feels statistically significant at the very least, right? Boys at 15% are more likely to, like I said, be diagnosed than girls at 8%. So hold that thought. I'm going to bring that full circle here in a minute. And then nearly a 300% increase in ADHD medication errors. I had to read that a couple of times. It's not a 300% increase in like the prescriptions. It is the errors in which are made with ADHD medications from 2000 to 2021. In 21 alone, 5,235 medication errors were reported. Those were the ones that were actually reported. Doesn't mean that that was everything, right? So the ones that were reported, that was essentially 1 child every 100 minutes. If we could somehow come up with the ones that weren't reported, I'm sure you could easily shave those numbers down to 1 kid per hour. That did not sit well with me. So again, that feels very significant, right? Since 1991, Ritalin prescriptions have increased 500x. Adderall and Dexedrine production has increased 2,000x worldwide. Now, the interesting part about Adderall, there's a study done that most of it is actually not actually going to kids or people with ADHD. There's some stat that like 25% of college students are on Adderall, right? So there's a little bit of like I hate to say black market type deal, but people are selling them and turning a profit on it, right? So all of those things I found fairly significant, right? And so something that I don't plan on doing is, what I don't plan on doing is sitting up here and just like medical bashing. I don't believe in that. They have their place. They do amazing things for all sorts of different people. And I'm not going to sit here and judge people for anything that you might have done, that you might have given your kid, or that you might have taken, right? So there's no medical bashing. There is no judgment. That is what Facebook is for. So we'll leave that there, right? So a little bit more on these drugs, right? What are these drugs that are being prescribed to our children and to adults, right? So the drugs that are used are known as stimulants, right? Adderall and Dexedrine are amphetamines, which is a Schedule II narcotic, right? So if the word stimulant or amphetamine or Schedule II narcotic or morphine or cocaine, if that starts to ring a bell for anybody, this is probably the bell that it's ringing. If you guys have ever seen that show, like he made a pretty penny off of that, right? So again, I'm not going to sit up here and bash, but I do want to raise awareness as to like what is being prescribed to these people, right? So some common side effects of these drugs: addiction, nervousness, anxiety, panic attacks, agitation, irritability, headaches, stomach aches, nausea, dizziness, severe side effects, heart disease, infected skin, cardiac arrest, sudden death. Whew. Feels a little bit like when you're watching those drug commercials on TV and you're like, that's a lot of side effects for seasonal allergies. Like, wow. I think I might just go blow my nose and call it a day, right? But again, why is it that these are the types of drugs that are being given to people? And there's a narrative that I've heard enough to where I've had to look into it, right? And people always talk about how these ADHD drugs work for people with it, right? So if you gave them to a normal person, right, they would probably feel nervous, anxious, feel like there's a panic attack, like feel like an elevated level of energy, right? And then people will say, people with ADHD, when they take it, oh, well, it actually mellows them out. It works in reverse order, right? It actually helps them focus. I'm going to show you why I don't believe that that's actually the case, and I'll show you what I believe is actually happening, right? And I'll let you guys kind of make that call for yourself. So this was what I was going to say. I wanted to pull this full circle with the difference between boys and girls, right? So this was a study done by the National Institute of Health, so the NIH. And what they essentially did was other concerns and conditions with ADHD by sex, right? So as you can see, the number one thing between when they combined boys and girls or separated to just boys and girls, by a landslide, it's this green bar, which is essentially any co-occurring condition included in the study. All that basically means is it's rarely just, almost never is it just ADHD. It's almost always accompanied with something else, right? So let's take a look. Let's start with the boys, right? So let's see what the next biggest bar is. And at 48%, it's behavioral or conduct problems, right? So now that lines up exactly with what we were talking about. You remember the pillars, right? Hyperactivity, impulsivity, boom. there's your behavioral and conduct disorder. Now, the part that really stuck out to me was this cream colored bar right here at almost 53%, almost 5% more. This is more frequent in girls than the leading cause with boys. Anxiety. It was tough for me to kind of put those two together, and that's, girls, one, are just generally smarter than boys, right? So you're able to mask things a little bit better, right? Sorry guys, this is the truth. I don't know if I'm breaking news to anybody here. But generally they're a little bit better at masking these symptoms, right? And even though they're dealing with anxiety or depression or nervousness, all of these different things, it can be associated with having ADHD, and that can be part of it. That's the inattention part. But it gets, like I said, the buck gets passed because people, that just the society we live in nowadays, we just assume 15-year-old girls should be anxious. We just assume 16-year-old girls should be depressed. And that like broke my heart when I was looking at this, and it made sense, right? So moving on, let's get to what's actually happening scientifically. So if you remember, what was the types of drugs that they're prescribing for kids with ADHD? It's stimulants, right? And the prevailing thought is that, it works kind of in reverse order. It actually mellows them out. Well, I'll let you guys decide. I'll give you the understanding of like what is actually happening, right? So your brain essentially has two different modes. It has default mode and task mode. Okay, so default mode is just kind of hanging out, just basically existing. If they're in school, maybe talking to your buddy, this, that, and the other. And then when the bell rings, the teacher says, okay, focus on me. Now we switch into task mode. Now it's time I have to actually focus on something. Now I actually have to get something done, right? And the way your brain is able to switch between these two, because you can't be in two places at once, right? So it's almost like a light switch, or like I said, the dopamine gate. It has to be one or the other. So how do we switch? What switches the light on and off, basically? And that's dopamine. So dopamine is essentially a neurotransmitter associated with the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so what does that mean? There's two different types of modes that your overall nervous system can be in, right? There's sympathetic and there's parasympathetic. Now, you guys probably haven't heard those words, but I'm sure, has anybody heard, raise your hands, anybody heard of fight or flight before? Sympathetic overdrive, that is the sympathetic version of your nervous system. And then parasympathetic is rest and recovery, right? So that's calm, that's peaceful, right? And so what actually happens with dopamine is it is released at this part of the autonomic nervous system, right? Contributing to responses like increased heart rate, increase in blood pressure to stressful situations, which is why you see it happen indirectly with the sympathetic nervous system. Right? So when that fight or flight is happening, right? So to kind of give you guys an idea of what that feels like, let's do this real quick. Everybody just go ahead and close your eyes for me. We're going to go into parasympathetic, okay? So I want you guys to take a nice, big, deep breath. Let it all out. Take another deep breath. And let it all out. Good. I want you to imagine you're on a beach. Somebody just handed you a nice cool beverage. Everything's calm. You just hear the sound of the waves. This should be 90 to like 95% of our life. This should be the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and recovery. Now this is what sympathetic can sound like. Get a little bit of a jolt there. Feel your heart start to go, right? Feel the blood pressure elevate. So you guys can go ahead and open up your eyes. That's the difference, that feeling of, ooh, okay, get up and going, right? So what's actually happening, right, for most people that don't have ADHD, you're constantly in parasympathetic, or at least that's the default mode, right? You should generally be in parasympathetic. So when dopamine does happen, right, when it does enter your bloodstream, it's very easy to switch from default mode to task mode. It's very easy to talk to your friend and then listen to the teacher. It's very easy to go ahead and play video games, and then when mom calls my name, it's very easy to answer her, right? Because something else that I thought was kind of funny with ADHD, everybody just associates them with not being able to focus. if they want to focus on something, somebody with ADHD, that's all that matters, right? Whether it's a video game, whether it's scrolling on social media, whether it's rearranging the spice rack in alphabetical order, but also cross-examining it so it's like color-coded as well, right? So what happens is when you're stuck constantly in sympathetic nervous system, what I believe to actually be happening is that dopamine is constantly in our system. So we have built up this tolerance, so it's hard to switch from one or the other. So kids in school are just kind of in a daydream, and they really want to focus, but they are constantly all gas, no break. They have so much dopamine in their system all the time. They've been scrolling social media all the time, and before you know it, it's hard. They want to switch, but they're stuck in default mode, and this teacher is yelling and yelling and yelling, and then finally they say, Levi, oh, that's a stressful situation. The teacher yelling at you, that elevates heart rate, that elevates blood pressure, that sends more dopamine into the system, and then boom, the light switch flicks, and now I can focus. Now I'm in task mode. Does that make sense? Same thing when you get a kid who's stuck, who's just, going on hour 5 of video game straight and is getting ready to do another 5 hours, right? And mom's trying to get his attention. Come on, I need you to take out the trash. Come on, I need you to take out the trash. And by the 4th time, hey, I need you to take out the trash. Boom. Okay, that's a stressful situation. Heart rate elevated, blood pressure elevated. Boom, that's enough dopamine to switch into it, right? Where most people who don't struggle with ADHD, they're able to flip back and forth because they haven't built up this tolerance to the amount of dopamine constantly in their system. Does that make sense? So the prevailing thought is that there's not enough dopamine in ADHD people, where they don't conduct it well enough. I would actually contend they have too much of it, and they've built up a tolerance to it, so it's hard to switch back and forth between the two. So why did we put them on those ADHD medications? Because they are stimulants, right? That was the whole point, was to get your heart rate going, was to elevate your blood pressure. That's why people get nervous and anxious. It's not like this reverse, like, oh, it just mellows them out. It just puts more, they're putting more gas on the fire, right? It's just all gas, no break, and they're trying to overload the amount of dopamine in the system so that they have an easier time. There's enough dopamine to be able to switch between the two, right? So whether it is recreational drugs, whether it's prescribed drugs, whether it is constantly working out, right? Whether it is constantly playing video games, whether it's constantly scrolling on social media, all of those things are quick dopamine hits. And so what people are actually doing, whether it's caffeine, like drinking a ton of coffee, or a couple years ago, like 20, 30 years ago, when it was a little bit more prevalent to smoke cigarettes, like a lot of nicotine, right? What people are actually doing with ADHD when they engage in those activities is they're actually self-regulating. They're actually self-medicating, right? And part of having ADHD is that impulsivity, and that's more likely to be like stuck with addiction, right? So it's almost this cycle that doesn't ever really stop. Does that all make sense? So that's what's happening neurologically speaking, down on a scientific level. So now this, I told you guys I'm going to give you guys value tonight. So these are 5 different things that you can do with your diet starting tomorrow that will make a difference in your life. And then the easiest one, in my opinion, is number 6, exercise. Don't overthink it. Just do it. It's good for everything, right? So I'm not going to get into every single one of these, but if you guys want to take out your phones, if you want to take a picture of it, you're more than welcome to. But these were the 5 things that I believe are going to help with, like I said, combat ADHD.
I'm just curious though, like the iron and the magnesium, like there's 1,000 different versions of magnesium. So which magnesium, and on the iron, like what are you actually recommending there?
My wife's got both of those for you. Okay. She'll have a link for you by the end of tonight.
Okay.
Magnesium is easy. Iron, I'm pretty sure she has a link for that as well. All right. You guys good? You guys ready to move on? Okay. So the question that I would actually ask you guys is, does any of that actually matter, right? Because if we're still stuck in sympathetic overdrive, if we're still stuck in fight or flight, if our body is still constantly flooded with dopamine, does that really, does changing your diet, is that actually going to help? Does exercising more, will that actually help? The short answer is yes, absolutely. But in some ways it'll almost act similar to how the drugs will, whether it is prescribed or recreational or some other ways to help with ADHD. So what I would offer is, let's get to the root cause of this. Let's get out of sympathetic overdrive. Let's get out of fight or flight, and let's get back into parasympathetic. Let's get back into that rest and digest, that rest and recovery, right? And again, it's hard to know what you're looking for. It's hard to see these things when you don't necessarily know what it is that you're looking for. That's why we have such an epidemic in this country, because a lot of times it's hard being a doctor, right? Just like a PCP, a pediatrician, they got a lot that they need to know about. So it can be hard to catch some of these things, these specific things for this specific diagnosis, right? So just kind of land that, that thought a little bit more here. So what I want you guys to do, I'm going to play this video. You've got two different teams here. You've got a team in white and you've got a team in black. What I would like for you guys to do is count how many times the team in white passes the basketball. Simple enough? Okay, cool. Pay attention. How many passes does that team in white make? Any guesses?
13.
13, good number. 13.
All these are 10.
Solidarity, we're all going with 13? All right, cool.
There was a self-class.
Yeah, all right, cool. How many of you guys saw the moonwalking bear? Nobody saw a moonwalking bear? Are you sure? Nice job, Mary.
Oh Lord, the guy there, yeah. Thought he had an extra play on. Big lizard bear.
It's easy to miss something that you're not looking for.
Yeah.
So again, that's why I'm not here to bash the medical profession. They don't actually know what it is that they're looking for, right? And honestly, a lot of chiropractors don't either. I've done extensive research and extended training on what to look for with these types of things, okay? There we go. All right, so let's start from the beginning, right? Let's actually start to get into some of this chiropractic stuff, right? So what I would actually argue is that, like I said, the default mode should be parasympathetic. It should be rest and recovery. And I'm sure a lot of you guys are probably thinking that, like, okay, well, why isn't that? Why are we stuck in this sympathetic? Why are we stuck in this overdrive? Why are we stuck in fight or flight? Well, in my opinion, it's happening before kids are even born. It's happening in utero, okay? Because for those 9 months, while a woman is actually pregnant, right? Well, it's hard to, grow a kid from scratch, right? And for those 9 months, that baby is electrically hardwired into mom. So they feel everything for those 9 months that mom feels. That's why that bond between mother and child is so close, because for 9 months, nobody knew you better than that kid did, right? And so in my opinion, nowadays, moms are just bombarded with stress and pressure and tension and this and that, and my mother-in-law said that, and my father-in-law says this, and I saw this on TV, and oh my God, we're going to war. Whew, it's a lot going on, right? And so what I actually see more frequently than anything with genetics, there is a genetic component to this with ADHD, but there's not much you can really change with that, so it doesn't really interest me, to be honest with you. But what I see almost to a fault when it comes to pregnancy, when I ask mom, like, okay, how was pregnancy? I can almost guarantee it was stressful. Whether there was an abusive relationship, whether she was going through a divorce, whether something was happening with the family, whether they were losing the house, maybe something medically came up, right? For those 9 months, if mom was stressed, so was the baby, right? So that developing fetus, that embryo, was constantly, it should be developing in parasympathetic, but it's starting to figure out, like, okay, I guess we're always supposed to feel like this. I guess we're always supposed to be tense, right? Has anybody been to a baby shower, right? Show of hands. Anybody been to a baby shower? Yeah. What's the book that almost always gets passed out? It's almost always given to the mother. Anybody know? What to expect when you're expecting. Anybody actually read that book?
Yes.
Horrifying. It is a horrifying book. Does anybody know the author of that book? Stephen King. Oh my God. It's a terrifying book, right? I'll summarize it for you. Are you ready? You're pregnant. That sucks. That's basically it. Your life is over, right? And so right from the jump, we do a poor job, in my opinion, of empowering mothers, and it's just a stressful journey all the way through, right? And so if that continues to happen when they're born into this world, into generally, if it's a hospital setting, it's kind of a sterile environment, it's loud, it's crazy, it's this, it's that. Again, it's just constant stress, right? So let's talk about those two different types of modes that your nervous system can be in. I'm going to really hammer this home because it's really important, and it's what is going to set chiropractic apart, right? So parasympathetic, like I said, rest and digest. That's the brake pedal. That's the slow down, right? This should be like 90 to 95% of our life. Decreases heart rate, decreases blood pressure, shunts blood to the organs away from muscles, right? So that the organs can have plenty of nutrients and the ability to carry out the functions that they need to. This is where recovery actually happens. I get a lot of CrossFitters specifically who work out really, really hard, and they tell me how great of shape they're in, but every time they come in here, they tell me they're hurt. Every single time they're injured. It's this constant, perpetual injury cycle that seems to happen. And the reason for that is because they train so hard and they don't give themselves a break. They actually get stuck in fight or flight. That's not where you recover from those workouts, and then you're constantly injuring yourself, right? That's where both sleep and digestion occur, and then it's more acetylcholine and serotonin present, right? Which are more long-lasting neurotransmitters. That's the long happy, right? And again, like I said, that's where sleep and digestion occur. Now, sympathetic, fight or flight. That is the gas pedal, right? ADHD, gas, all gas, no brake, it never stops. That was originally designed for like 5% of our life, maybe like 10% of our life. That was so if there was a bear in this room, you would go, it's time to go. It's time to fight or flight. Get out of here, right? That increases heart rate, that increases blood pressure. Blood is actually shunted away from your organs to muscles, right? So that you can either fight the thing that's in here or run away from it. That wired feeling, it shuts down feelings of digestion. It shuts down feelings of being hungry. It shuts down feelings of wanting to go to sleep, right? It's constant dopamine. It's constant epinephrine. It's constant norepinephrine, which I don't know if you guys know that word. That's adrenaline. So it's just go, 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 and it never stops, right? Last thing that you really want to do is if there was a bear in this room is feel like, oh man, I really need to pee. It's time to go. Nobody cares, right? So again, that was originally designed for like danger, for like cavemen, right? Now, the issue that has occurred, yes, our lives have gotten safer, but they're more stressful probably than ever before, right? Whether it's physical stress, mental stress, emotional stress, what we see on TV, what we see on our phone, it's just constant stress all the time, right? And so what can happen is if we get stuck in that fight or flight mode, that's what can happen, right? It's getting stuck over there, right? So to me, that's the moonwalking bear, is all of that stress that happens while a baby is in utero. And then as they're being born, again, I see this, it's almost a guarantee I see it with an ADHD patient while I'm talking with mom. There's almost a guarantee that there was some sort of birth intervention as well. I can almost guarantee it was an emergency C-section, there was a vacuum extraction, forceps extraction, and if there was none of those things, I could almost guarantee it was an aggressive birth. And I'll get into a little bit about what that actually is, right? So I can almost guarantee it was not a simple and easy delivery. So really from the beginning, all this baby has ever known is stress, right? And the one thing that does drive me nuts is this just a little bashing. I told you I'm not going to do any bashing. The one thing that I don't like when doctors say is they'll just tell mom, like, they'll just grow out of it. No, don't worry about it. No, I know it's crazy. They'll just grow out of it. Don't worry about it. If there's one thing you get from this workshop here today, kids don't grow out of anything. They just grow into something else. The problem doesn't ever get solved if you sweep it under the rug. It just gets worse, right? Because to me, what is really the difference between a newborn who can't sleep, who can't soothe, constantly constipated, and cries all the time? We call that colic, right? But why is that any different than a fifth grader who can't sit still, is emotional, struggles with sleep, and doesn't really like a lot of variety in his foods? Likes brown and tan. That's kind of the extent of what that fifth grader likes. We call that ADHD. For an adult, that looks like burnt out Anxiety, struggles to sleep, struggles with social interactions. What do we call that nowadays? Normal. Which is kind of sad, right? That's normal. My question to you is, what's the difference? What's the difference between those three things? To me, the only difference is the diagnosis. The neurology is shockingly similar. And that's what I'll show you here in a second. There's really no difference, right? So now, let's go ahead and get to the reason you guys all came here. So go ahead, stand up real quick for me, stretch out. I know it's an ADHD workshop, so I know somebody's probably just dying to stand up or do anything, right? Look, I know you got to just say something. Just like let it out, man. I see it. Is the remote over there? Okay. All right, so what I want you guys to go ahead and do, I want arms up nice and high. And then I want you, to the person next to you, I want you to put your hand on their back. Make a friend. Tap. Say, good job for coming here tonight. Okay, go ahead and have a seat for me. All right. Keep the positivity, right? I appreciate that. So let's come to the home stretch. This is what it's all about. This is what we do as neurologically focused chiropractors. Why can we get such great results for people with neurodiverse issues? So what I like to talk about is the 5 Ds of subluxation. Okay, so what does that mean, right? So chiropractors work with the nervous system, right? So we got a couple of different scans that allow for us to see how your nervous system is functioning, right? And so we like to talk about a progression. How do these things start to happen, right? So what a subluxation essentially is, it's a misalignment of a vertebra, generally a couple, right? That's lost its proper juxtaposition with the one above and the one below it. So what that basically means is it's misaligned. And now it's starting to put pressure on nerves, and now it's starting to create some interference. Now the brain's having a hard time talking to the body, right? And so what that looks like I was saying, that's what an aggressive birth can look like. That's what an emergency C-section, forceps, all those different things. Right from the jump, do you think there's any chance in the world, like 1% chance, that maybe there's a slight misalignment in that baby's neck? Like everybody disagree? Maybe just a little bit, right? There was a study that was done that shows that for emergency C-sections, the amount of pressure that is generally put, right, they did the average, that is put on a child's neck, right, the connection from brain to the rest of the body, the bridge to your world, is anywhere from 50 to 70 pounds per square inch of pressure. So to put that into a little bit more, visceral understanding is if you had your newborn baby, right, and what's the first thing that everybody always says when you have a kid, right? And you don't want to give it to like that brother-in-law who's asked you 4 times, who's like, no, seriously, come on, let me hold the kid. And you're like, okay. Everybody always says hold the head. So 50 to 70 pounds, what that can actually look like is if you held the baby by the head, took some rope, wrapped it around his foot, and dropped a 70-pound dumbbell. Anybody like that visual?
No.
Anybody signing up for that? Exactly, right? So right from the jump, it starts with a misalignment of the cervical spine in your neck. So now what that starts to do, if that's never corrected, right, and our leader in the clubhouse currently still is Miss Jovi up there, her first adjustment came at 5 days old. So if that's never adjusted, if that's never corrected, if it's constantly left there, misplaced from the moment of birth, we now move into the second D of subluxation, or that misalignment. That's disafferentation, which is a fancy way of saying abnormal sensory input. And so, okay, what does that mean? 2 plus 2 equals 5? Now, I've seen this on Instagram. People like make some sort of an argument as to why 2 plus 2 equals 5. Not the case, right? For my case, 2 plus 2 equals 4, right? But that is obviously wrong. So what can happen now is that baby with that misalignment in the neck, that's how we start with that colicky, that fussy, constantly crying, can't soothe, right? Constantly constipated. What's actually happening is their perception of the world, because babies can't obviously do much of anything other than kind of see what's happening in their world. The lights are brighter, the noises are louder. Did anybody have like a really light sleeper of a child where it's like, if you didn't take your shoes off and you made one step and then now I'm up, now there's no way we're getting her back to sleep, right? So the input is different, right, because of that misalignment. So again, if that continues to persist, we now move into dysautonomia, the third D of subluxation. So an imbalance of the autonomic nervous system. Basically, an imbalance of your nervous system. All gas, no brake. Does that sound familiar? We get stuck with that gas pedal down. It is fight or flight. It is go, go, go. It's constant dopamine. It's constant epinephrine. It's constant norepinephrine, right? So again, if that's never attended to, right? So now we're at that fifth grader, right? Who's unable to really sit still, listen to the teacher. Maybe it's the 16-year-old girl who has trouble with anxiety, depression, things like that. If that continues to persist, now we have dysfunction, which is an interference of optimal function of other systems. That's a fancy way of saying, do you guys remember that chart that I showed you? Is it always just ADHD, or is it ADHD with something? So these things start to come offline. They stop working the way that they should. Sleep being the chief numero uno. It's really hard with kids with ADHD to either get to sleep or get restful sleep, right? So when that starts to go, I don't know if you guys, anybody have just the worst week ever, and by the time you get to Friday, you haven't slept a wink for whatever reason, it was just a stressful time. Anybody their most charming on that Friday? No. Or do you maybe snap at somebody kind of quick? That is the life your kid or somebody with ADHD is living constantly. They're constantly living their worst day because it's just constant, all gas, no break. And so again, if dyskinesia, disafferentation, dysautonomia, dysfunction, if all those things are not, if none of them are ever corrected, now we get to dyskinesis, an abnormal energy expenditure or output. Not happy, right? That's essentially what that is. It's the inability to focus. It's the inability to self-soothe. It's all of those different things, right? So now that we know the order in which this can happen, how can we actually help as chiropractors, right? So this is how. So we can measure it, okay? So what every adjustment does is every adjustment stimulates your parasympathetic nervous system. It is a vagal response, which is another part of a nerve that is literally calming your entire body, right? So we go right back to the very top, right? We take care of that dyskinesia. We make sure that the spine is moving correctly, which then allows for the correct amount of perception to come in. You're not feeling that the lights are too loud, or the lights are too loud, the lights are too bright, the noises are too loud. It can feel like that sometimes though, I'm sure, right? So once we take care of that misalignment, then we get the right amount of perception coming in. We start to interact with our world the way that it's actually happening, not the way that we're perceiving it to be happening. Now, if we're getting out of that sympathetic overdrive and we can relax and we can move into that parasympathetic, now we take care of dysautonomia. As we take care of that, now all of a sudden people are starting to sleep better. That is the first thing that I can almost guarantee. I don't like making guarantees, but 90% of the time, sleep is the first thing that comes up for these kids. They finally get a good night's sleep. And when that happens, now they don't look so much like my man here, right? So like I was saying, if you can't track something, if you can't measure something, then you can't grow it or you can't optimize it, right? So I don't like guessing. I don't even like flipping a coin. I don't like it. I think it's stupid, right? I like knowing, especially when it comes to my patient's health, right? So the way that we're measuring this for adults, we take x-rays and we do our nervous system scans. Now I'll get into what those mean here in a second. For adults, we always send out for x-rays because we want to see, one, they're a little bit older. We want to make sure that we're not adjusting into anything that we don't want to adjust into, right? But also, it gives me an idea. You can see that it says progressive cervical degeneration and progressive lumbar degeneration. Based on these charts, I can figure out how long has that dyskinesia or that subluxation, how long has that misalignment been there, right? So if I know how long it's been there, I have a better understanding of how much care is actually needed for the child or for the adult. Well, generally more for the adult. For the kids, unless we see something that is just glaring in the intake paperwork, we generally don't have to send out for x-rays. But everybody, whether you're an adult or a kid, gets a nervous system scan, okay? I've talked about it enough. I mean, how many times do you guys think I've said nervous system here? You guys are probably sick of that word, right? It's a big deal. It's important, which is why we measure it, okay? So we've got 3 different scans here. We have our EMG scan, right, which I'll get into a little bit about what each of them does. What the EMG scan is essentially tracking is the energy output. How much energy is this child or is this adult using, right? And the reason, a lot of times, especially for adults, a lot of times you see these black lines all over the place because generally, you can imagine, these bones are not in the correct place, which means these muscles are not working the way that they should be. They're having to overcompensate. They're having to use more energy. Exactly. So that's what we track here with the EMG. We're going to track how much energy are these people, how much energy are their nervous systems having to use. Then we have our heart rate variability. Anybody have like a smartwatch? Anybody have one of those? I can all but guarantee your smartwatch tracks heart rate variability. And to give you an idea of what that actually means, it's tracking to see how efficiently your nervous system on a daily basis handles stress. Are we stuck over here to the left in fight or flight like this person is? Are you too far to the right? Now we're starting to deal with autonomic imbalances, or we're starting to see autoimmune struggles, right? I want you nice, right down the middle, nice balanced nervous system with plenty of energy, right? What I see a lot of times with adults, right down here in this bottom left-hand corner. Anybody know what that left-hand corner is? Bottom left-hand corner. That is stressed and no energy. Sound familiar for anybody? What is really concerning, though, is I'm seeing a lot more kids here. And the reason that's concerning is even with ADHD, and generally regardless of how old they are, they should be at the very least above this line. They should be somewhere in this green zone. And so what this tells me is if that little white dot, which is them, if it falls down into this left-hand corner, it tells me that it has been there for a long time, that gas pedal has been stuck down and they are just burning through energy constantly with no, and they have no control over that. They would like to take their foot off the gas, they just have no idea how. And then this last scan that we take is a thermal scan, which gives me an idea of how well your organs are actually regulating themselves. Right? So remember, if you're stuck in sympathetic nervous system, if you're stuck in fight or flight, remember where all of that blood goes? It goes away from the organs. So if it goes away from the organs, they're going to run less efficiently. So if they're running less efficiently, they have to work hard. If you and me work really hard, we get really hot and sweaty. It's the same thing that happens here, is we're actually able to track the thermal pattern that's actually happening, and these all line up to different areas of your organ system. Right? Because even though some organs might be here or here or here or here or there, all of those nerves eventually make their way back to the spine, they make their way back up to the spine, and they make their way to the brain. That's how the brain has an understanding of where everything is in space, right? So I take all of these scans, right? Regardless, everybody gets scans, and if you're an adult, we get these x-rays, and it gives me an understanding as to how bad is it, right? So what I'm not going to do is if Michelle came in, I'm not just going to give her like, oh, here's the ADHD special, Michelle. Here you go, is what we always do. Her care plan is going to be different than Carl's, and it's going to be different than Levi's, and it's going to be different than Andy's, and it's going to be different than Mary's, right? Again, I told you guys I don't like guessing, and if you can tell, I'm a little bit of a nerd. I like getting down into the minutia of it, right? There's not one special magical adjustment that's just going to solve everything. Right? The example I always use in our initial consultations is the idea of running a marathon, right? If you guys all decided to just run a marathon tomorrow, 26.2 miles, how many of y'all think you could do it? I know I definitely couldn't. Anybody think they could qualify for the Boston Marathon? No. But if you tried and you didn't do it and you didn't get the time that you wanted, you'd probably think you're not very good at it. Is that the case? No, you just didn't give yourself time to work up to it. You didn't give yourself a workout plan, and you didn't stick to it, and you didn't expand upon it, and eventually get to that goal in 3 to 6 months, which is exactly what our care plans are aimed to do. I'm not going to solve you tomorrow, but it's the accumulation of slowly getting your body back into parasympathetic, back into rest and recovery, and out of that fight or flight. That's where you start to see the magic happen. Okay? Now, don't just take my word for it. I realize that I've talked quite a bit, and so I'm sure you guys are probably honestly sick of hearing it. So I thought it'd be pretty cool if a couple other moms specifically told you their son or daughter's story.